Hi everyone, my name is Ron and I'm going to show you today a little bit of the things that I do when I'm trying to make a nice little bit of scenery, a little bit of terrain. Anything which I've used, I'll put links in the description for you. The piece in front of us right now is one I've, in true Blue Peter fashion, is one I made earlier. This is two Sector 3 chem bats from TT Combat, laser cut MDF terrain. Really lovely kits, very easy to put together. No instructions came with them, you have to get them from the website, but they are literally one page and everything just fits together really well once you sort of understood what you're doing. So very quickly on this completed piece, I just wanted to show you some of the things that I've done, and then we'll move on to another piece of terrain then, which will then apply some of those techniques to that, and we'll get to it. So very quickly, in order to add some piping, we've used some drinking straws, literally just plain and simple drinking straws. They're not the best bit of kit to use, but in a pinch they'll do the trick. Just as long as you make sure you prime them properly, then paint will stick to it, but you do have to be gentle with it, and you are going to have to put some sort of a finisher on them at the end. I use a spray lacquer to keep everything attached and to protect the model from general gaming. There's another drinking straw here that you can see. I'll turn the piece around for you. You can see I've used a couple more down here to represent piping that's connected, and a couple of little offcuts that are probably 2 centimeters in length, not very long, but I've just stuck underneath the lip there to create some overflow pipes, and we'll come to this little string of overflow in a minute. This piece has also got some War Games tournaments pieces on, which is this little walkway here, and some of these balustrades which came from a staircase which I have. So very quickly, we use ready mix filler for the base. This is a foam core base, 5mm foam core base, where we've simply trimmed it at an angle, which we'll be doing later on in the video to show you. And then we've covered it all with ready mix filler so that we can hide all the bits of polystyrene. If I turn to this side, it's probably easier to see. You'll see that we've actually got here, we've got gravel and we've got some other loose rough textures sort of sitting here. I'll be showing you the mix that we use to make that as well. All of these things help the terrain piece to look really nice, but because of the way you apply them, it actually adds a lot of strength to the base and the fixings as well. So they're not just decorative, they're really sort of quite practical as well. Obviously when you're playing games, they'll function decoratively, but in the back of your mind, you'll know that this is going to strengthen some of the joins that you've got. Some of the other things we've done, we've got little posters that we've attached here. These were super easy to do, and I'll tell you how to do them as well. I can tell you that now actually. Literally went on Google, found myself some 40k and Necromunda scale posters. There's some really useful images, easy to find on the first page of the search, which were printable on an A4 sheet. Simply cut the posters out that you want to use, make sure you trim them nice and neat and tidy. PVA the back. I put a little bit of coloured ink into the PVA, either brown and grey, just to sort of dirty it up a little bit, because I didn't want the posters to be pristine. And then once you've applied the poster to your terrain piece, just put another coat of PVA on the top while it's all still wet, so the paper kind of soaks it up and that'll strengthen it. I put a couple of curls on this poster here like it's coming away. That was really easy to do. I just rolled it around the tip of the paintbrush. And again, just apply PVA to give it some strength and some holding, and that's how you put posters on. At the top here, I'll try and get this close to the camera for you, you'll see there's a wanted poster right here. This was literally just a wanted poster which I folded over the balustrade. Same technique, just applied the PVA glue to it, literally just folded it over and then put PVA over the top to strengthen it and solidify it. This blanket here, which you can sort of see here, camera doesn't really do it that much justice. It's literally just a piece of toilet paper folded to look like a blanket and then heavily applied with PVA to give it some fixing, and away to go. Paint it and it just looks like someone, it's a little bit useful throwaway scatter. I mean, it breaks up the surface, gives it a bit of three-dimensional texture, so you're not just dealing with sort of flat MDF terrain, which is a thing that I love about the terrain. It comes in its own sort of engraved textures, but it is flat, so you kind of had to add some physical depth to it. And this little overflow pipe here that you can see, that was an interesting challenge. The way I did that was I simply glued a piece of thread at the mouth of the pipe, glued it to the base with a bit of super glue to hold it in place, so it was fairly tight. And then all I would do is I would apply a blob of PVA at the top. It would run down the thread. Where it would stop, I'd use a toothpick just to tease the PVA glue down. It goes very, very thin, one blob spread over the other piece of a thread that long. If I had to do this again, I probably wouldn't do such a long overflow. I'd probably do a shorter one, it would be easier. Repeat that several times so you build up a decent thickness. And then I did the same but with super glue to harden it up. And I repeated that till I got to the desired thickness and the desired flow. Again, once the PVA starts to thicken up, you can quite easily see that it can be teased down with a toothpick. And then of course you just paint it. This was just literally a little pool of PVA, put on the bottom and let go off. It gave me what I wanted. I didn't feel the need to go and get any sort of water-based resin textures for it. I just wanted something that looked like a goopy overload of gunk on the floor, basically. I didn't want it to be too chaotic. And that is how I came up with this terrain piece. Obviously I painted it mostly with spray paints. It was undercoated black. I then masked the top and the base. I painted the main body. I masked the ladders as well. I painted the main body with a black undercoat and a dusting of red spray paint, all of which I bought from B&M fairly cheaply, matte finish paints, £3 or £4 a can, and they go quite far. Once that was then dried, I masked this and then did the same at the top. I left the top exposed in the ladders and painted that with a silver spray paint. Although I will say with the metallic spray paints, you've got to be careful because they don't tend to take paint all that well. The shine that you can see there is actually because of the spray lacquer, but I had to apply an awful lot of ink to coat the surface of that, to dirty it down, but also just to be able to apply the paint because it was highly resistant to taking the paint. So if you are going to use a metallic spray, just be prepared to put in the little bit of extra work that's needed to get paint to adhere to it. And then I just came back to it literally with just some Citadel paints. I applied some inks around where I wanted this to look sort of dirty. You know, you can see here we've kind of got that dirt effect. It just kind of, you know, ruddies it up a little bit. Just ink washes to make that happen. And it was the usual sort of dry brush techniques then. I used Steel Legion Drab to highlight the red base to bring it more to an earthy colour. Any patches which showed up, I used Bugman's Glow because I wanted a similar sort of tone, but I wanted a brighter but different colour, so it would sit with the theme but not stand out completely. But I wanted a bit of variance in there to make it a bit more interesting. And that is, in a nutshell, this piece of terrain. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the things that I do. I'm going to apply that to another terrain piece, which I haven't started work on. It's only assembled, so I'm going to be going through putting together the base for it, attaching it to the base, and texturing it, and so on and so forth, and building up from there. So what I thought it would be useful to do before I get started, having talked about the first terrain piece, is I wanted to show you some of the things that I actually have to hand when I'm doing some terrain. Very, very useful bits and pieces. So my local pet shop sells these miniature trug buckets. These are brilliant because they're super flexible, which means that when you put stuff in it, you can easily tip it and use it to pour. It's about £1 and maybe £1.50. Very, very useful. I go to the B&M store for a lot of my materials just because it's cheap and cheerful. This is currently on sale on B&M for just another £1.50. It's called Decorative Sand. It's literally just gravel. Now I've done a 2 foot by 2 foot gaming tile. I've done the scenery piece that you've seen already. I've got another tower that I've used the basing for. As you see, I've only used a teeny tiny little bit of this material. So I mean, for £1.50, this is going to go a fair way. I mean, that's really, really helpful. And it's a nice sized gravel for your 40k Necromunda scale 28mm models. So I recommend that. My local pound shop, I think it's Pound Stretcher actually, sells this super glue. It's a multi-pack of super glue which comes with 8 bottles of super glue. It's not the best super glue on the planet, but for the purposes of giving me some quick fix on terrain, this stuff is wicked. I do have Gorilla super glue as well, Gorilla Glue, which is awesome for a much stronger fix, but I use a lot of this because it's cheap, cheerful, and I can always just lay my hands on it real easy. Of course, you've got to have your nice sharp knife. Make sure you've got a good sharp fresh blade in there when you're doing your cutting, because that makes things a lot easier and you're a lot less likely to hurt yourself. But always be careful when you're using one of these things. Don't go stabbing yourself or slicing any fingers off, because it's hard to model when you're covered in blood and you've got no fingers, so be careful with that. Now then, one of my favorite things to use are some of these bad boys. These are PG Tips pyramid bags. Yes, they are tea bags. I've got another one here. 3 will do for the moment, so it's not really a problem. I use these because they make brilliant scatter material. So one of the mixes that I regularly use, and I'll just quickly make it together now, tear off the top, pour out your tea leaves. The reason why I like this stuff is it's very granular, but unlike sand, when you apply this to terrain and put glue on it, it doesn't clump. So it retains that lovely texture that you want when you're putting some sort of rough terrain on the floor. And I like to put a little sprinkle of the decorative sand in there. I don't use too much because I don't need it. There we are, that's it. Give it a little shake about, that's it, I got my little pot mixed. When it comes time to apply this on the terrain, I'm just going to squeeze my bucket, pour it out, and then tip back off into the bucket. Really, really helpful. And cheap. Really, really cheap. We should all have a bunch of tea bags knocking around, and it's a great material for using on your scenery. Obviously use a pencil, because that's great for marking things out. We use any bits of offcut sprue, bits of MDF terrain sprues that we've got left over. I mean, I've trimmed these down just to fit into the pot, but these are great because you can trim them down to make excellent bits of looking rubble by mixing it into stuff. We use, I mean, this is the stuff I've got at the moment. This is ready mixed filler. There's different stuff that you can buy. This is, I mean, the poly filler I like because it's extremely light and it doesn't shrink, so it doesn't pull on anything that uses a basing material like foam core. So it's nice, but you do have to work it to get it to stick. But once it's on there, I mean, it's on there. Probably a little bit more expensive is the poly filler, but you pay for what you get, and this is a really nice nice filler to use when you're doing the terrain. So you have that. Obviously you've got things like your clippers because you want to be trimming things. You've got the super glue that we mentioned. I happen to have a few strips of this what I'm going to refer to as L beam or L shaped plastic card. These are great for putting trims on things, and I always keep my offcuts of the flat strips of plastic card. These are 4mm measurements. They're quite good for detail work, I guess, the 4mm stuff. I have a whole pack of the flat strips here just in case. Those get used. We also have another bits box here, which I just keep things like my Sector Mortalis hatch. We've got the crates. I've got the cases from Necromunda in case I decide I want to use them in the terrain. I've got my sort of, now these are great actually, these barrel halves. What you're supposed to do with these, and I'll talk about this very quickly, and I'll show you one very quick neat trick. These are supposed to fit together in simplest terms, just like this, and then you end up with a nice barrel. Well, a great way to have some terrain and get 2 bits of terrain out of this, don't attach them, simply glue them to the terrain like this. Okay, it'll sit at a funky little angle, and then you can put filler around it and you end up with what looks like a half buried barrel. And of course I'm only using half of it, so I can do a couple of barrels that are buried. Nice little trick, I've used it a couple of times, and of course they're nice looking and easy to use once you've got them. Any bits of offcuts of drinking straw are always helpful, because you can add little pipes and things like that. And I mean, obviously they'll just fit with a bit of PVA and a bit of super glue, so go on easily. And I have a nice little metal tool which comes from a gentleman's manicuring kit or grooming kit. These are quite good for sort of poking things around and getting them into position. So yeah, I mean, I keep my little bits box there handy. And then we obviously have some tools, a nice little spreader if I want to sort of do some bulk spreading of the filler. And we also have an old stainless steel kitchen knife or butter knife. This is good for poking things around a little bit more carefully on a terrain. It's not used, we don't use it for eating anymore, so I've pinched it from the kitchen. It's now part of my modelling kit. So this is all the bits and pieces that I tend to have to hand when I'm doing a bit of terrain. You notice I don't have any sand, and that's because the terrain that I'm building doesn't feature grassy or sandy areas. It's more sort of worn down and rugged sort of industrial, because I'm basing out of Necromunda, which means that I don't really have a great need for sand to go on the bases. So the piece of terrain I'm going to look at today is this. So this is from War Games tournaments. This particular bulkhead is just a spare bulkhead that didn't have any detail that came with it, so I just slapped a bunch of circle things on it. And on the inside I did the same. I just sort of put a frame on it just to break up its shape rather than having an extremely plain bulkhead. But you can see here the bulkheads are quite nice. Once you start layering them on, you can see that a lot of the detail really likes to come through, and it makes a nice little terrain piece. So this is probably about 6 to 7 inches square. Nice little terrain piece I'm going to be working on today. And I've already got a piece of foam core where I've marked out the layout of the foot positions and the rough edge of the terrain that I'm going to be working with. So what I've done now is I have trimmed the edges just to sort of fit the profile of the base that I want, marked the feet out as you've seen, and I have also drawn a roughly 1 centimetre's worth of gap around the original profile. I've done a score. I've cut into the foam core, but not too deeply. I just wanted to sort of slice past the paper and into the foam a little bit, and I've started ripping off the paper. And then all I'll do, I'm not too worried about these rough edges here because they can be tidied up really easily later on. What I'm aiming to do now is simply slice at an angle from the base up to my line to give me a chamfered edge for my base. Now, foam core is great stuff, it's good and sturdy. What I will say though is once you start slicing into this, it has the potential to bend. So when you are making a base, just remember that you're going to have to strengthen this up with your filler that we mentioned earlier. Especially stuff like this which says smooth finish, no sagging or shrinking, no sanding. That basically means it's a high quality filler, so once you stick it on, it's going to stay as you put it. And that will help to strengthen the edges of the base. It's not worth going too far outside the edges of the perimeter of your building, because when you play things like Necromunda, you're going to want some of the floor space on the table. So you want to try and keep them tight, but you also don't want to lose a lot of this workable space here for putting on sort of the extra details. Now, I literally, very carefully, I'm just sewing very gently into the polystyrene and taking off bits as I'm going, just like that. Right? Take your time. It is a sharp knife. You have to just sort of make sure that you're not going too crazy. If you slice too far or you get too long of an edge into it, you're going to end up with too much play. You don't want to have too long of a gap between the edge of the surface that you're going to be playing on and the underneath of the base. Once it's long, that's where you're more likely to get warping. So try and keep it sort of within 1 centimetre top down, and that'll give you a nice sort of edge on your base. What I'll do now is I'm going to finish trimming this up, and then I'll tidy up the edges with a Stanley knife just to get the sort of neat and tidy looking, and then I'll come back to you, and then I'll show you this base ready then for a bit more work. So there we are, I've come back now, I've trimmed up all the edges. All I've done, I've put a little chamfer as you can see, all the way around the base, around about 1 centimetre. It's not a science, you don't have to be too precise. Sometimes being exact will just go against what you want to achieve. I've marked up in a nice bright colour there where the feet are going to be marked. So it's a bit easier for you guys to see in the video. We're going to be covering that with some terrain and filler and texture, so we're not going to see it later on anyway. But that's a good sturdy base, okay? And what that's going to do is that's going to give me something solid to mount the scenery piece on, so that when we're playing the games it's not going to fall apart. The trick is to use this very practical function of basing and make it support the building rather than just be sort of purely decorative. So all I'm going to do now is just make sure that I'm satisfied with how this is going to fit. Okay, have a little spin around on the base just to make sure that I've got enough. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy with that. You notice I've put an undercut here on top of this piece here. It's because I don't need it, and having a bigger base is literally going to cause more problems than is needed. What I recommend you do with the base is you give yourself what you need to stabilize and strengthen the building, and don't go too much. If I'd have added a big corner here, as I'm marking here on my hand, then I would have added all this space and nothing attached to the building, which means I've got more room or more margin for error when it comes to warping, and I don't really want the base warping on me. So I've given myself what I need, and then I'm ready to start attaching this to the base. And in the next section I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you some of the ideas that I've got before I start adding some little extra details to this for the sake of making it a little bit more interesting for play. So in this clip I have decided that I wanted to add a bit of random texture to the center of the base. Now I've taken some bits of sprue, I'll just bring them up here so you can see them. Okay, and I've just literally clipped them up into small pieces, and they'll be mixed with some of the filler. As we put the filler on in the middle, I plan to create like a mound of debris in the center of this base so that it's not just a hollow space underneath. And in order to excuse me, further break up that space, I'm going to add a few more bits of detritus and junk. For instance, this little cap is from one of those Glade 3-in-1 plug-in thingamybobs. It's the lid off of the little oil-filled bottles. I kept hold of it just because it's an interesting shape, nothing more than that. So that's going to become part of what's going in the middle. And I've also taken some drinking straws and some cuts of the L-shaped plastic card. Now I've measured these to be 78 millimeters. All right, and there's a reason for that, and that is because by the time I include for the depth of the base, which is these little base plates on the legs, and the height of the bulkhead, from the bottom to the touching of the base here is 78 millimeters. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create a vertical feature, 78 millimeters. Now it doesn't matter that the bottoms aren't straight cut, because that's going to be, quite frankly, hidden under some filler, so we're never going to see that. And rather than just having a couple of straight upright bits of random sort of L-shaped strips, we're going to I've trimmed up some drinking straws. I'm going to glue them inside to get them a bit more substance, and rather than waste the curve of the straw, I've trimmed it down a bit shorter, and I'm going to run that across, and effectively I'm going to make myself some sort of like a H structure that will sit underneath, similar to this, in this sort of capacity. Although I'm probably going to trim this to be a bit shorter to match the length of this, and I will use that as well to break up the shape of just the straw, and also to give it a little bit of extra support. So literally just using random offcuts of bits of sprue, bits of garbage, straw. I'm going to glue all these together now. I'm not measuring it other than the 78 mil because I want to be able to glue this to the base, and then when I fit this scenery piece to the base, I want to be able to have this glued and fit with the underside of the first floor on the terrain piece. So it's got a bit of fixing there. So I'm just going to use my cheap super glue. I'm going to very quickly give myself my structure that I want to run to. So I'm going to start by giving myself my guide in terms of how wide I want this thing to be. So just nothing more complex than a dribble of super glue just to get this fixed in place. Alright, it doesn't have to be spectacular. It's going to be underneath the building. You're not really going to see it. It's just so that when you look underneath, it's more than just a plain surface space. Now I did put enough glue in here for this thing to dribble, which is handy because I needed to glue it anyway. I'm going to pop a bit of glue in here, try not to glue myself to it, which I've just done, and I'm going to attach my bit of curvy straw, and I'll use a pair of clippers just to trim that back into shape in a bit. So nothing more complicated. I'm making this up as I go along at this point. Hold it in place. That's now held, nice and easy. And this is going to form the the structure underneath, which I'm going to use to break up the shape. It'll also give me something to wrap filler around. And the thing with rubble, when you're doing bases, you can't just like have a random bit of crap in the middle of the base. It doesn't work. Detritus and waste material tends to gather around things. So by putting something like this in place, I'm creating a fixing point on the floor, which is going to allow me to build up material around its base so that I have a reason for it being there. And also it gives it something to fix to as well. So you're going to find that that's really, really helpful. Now then, I'm also going to glue my next piece before I start trimming that, just to give the glue a bit more time to go off. So just a little run of glue. Like I said, this is cheap glue, so I can sort of use it with impunity. And this, I'm just going to slot straight in. Okay. And that's that one on. So now all I have to do now is I'm just going to trim off, using nothing more complicated than a pair of clippers, just to trim that straw down. Excuse me. Just trim this off here. Fantastic. There we go. I'll glue that down, that's good. There we go. And then all I'm going to do now, I'm just going to attach these to each other. Like I said, there's nothing frightening or spectacularly brilliant about this. It's not going to be very well seen, so it doesn't have to be absolutely pristine, but underneath the back end of it I'm going to have a pipe, so when I look at it from different angles I've got a bit of variance. It's not just like a random piece of strut work. Plus it gives you the more things you use, like drinking straws in your terrain, the more you can come back to using them. So for instance, you know, once you start using this as a thematic set of pipes, you're able to sort of justify seeing it absolutely everywhere you go. So the more you use them, the better it's going to be for you, in short. So I'd recommend picking something that you can use easily and consistently, and then use it. You know, just use it as often as you can, because it will give all of your different terrain sets from all the different places that you've sourced them a similar looking set of items, so that you can draw all together thematically. So what I'm going to just quickly trim a little bit more off of that so it will fit a little bit better. And you're going to love the clippers, they're super helpful. I'm not too worried about the pipe coming away from its fitting at the moment, because once I apply a bit more super glue to this, it's just going to run at the crack and it's going to rejoin it. So I mean, I think the thing with terrain making is, especially when you're making stuff up on the fly like we are here, you can't be getting too het up over little details. You know, it takes away from the fun. You know, you might as well enjoy what you're doing. And then yeah, there we go, that's a little bit better. Cool beans. I do have some flat strips. I'll probably end up using a flat strip just to sort of join all this together, for a little bit of extra strength. So I'm going to put this together, and a bit of glue, and get going with that. As I said, it's rough and ready. It doesn't have to be absolutely spectacular, it doesn't have to be perfect. I would never suggest to anybody that you spend too much time getting this stuff absolutely bang on the button, because you'll just end up sort of taking all the fun out of everything that you're trying to do. And remember that in Necromunda particularly, the theme is that everything's just kind of grown organically over time. It's this wonderful, magnificent spire that at the height of the Emperor's Golden Age, was a sort of bustling industrial thing. But now it's all kind of fallen to rack and ruin, and lots of bits of pieces of what is essentially the underhive have just been sort of thrown together. So, you know, the underhivers didn't give a damn. They didn't give a damn about precision work. A lot of the time they just knocked it all up, made it work, and carried on with their day. So although I can still see a little bit of pipe work there, I may well just come back and trim a little bit of straw, cheat, put a bit of plastic card over the top of that just to make it all sort of fit together. In fact, the plastic card is probably what I'll do. I'll stick another bit of L bracket on just to give me some fixing, and yeah, we'll just make it up as we go along for this piece. As I said, all it is just a break-even piece of terrain that we've got going on here. It's just used to sort of crack the underside of the building to give us something that's got a little bit more variety to it, so that it's not just a plain underneath. Don't get me wrong, a plain underneath is great for practical playing. You want to be able to move your models around underneath. That is kind of the point of Necromunda. However, having said that, I personally quite enjoy a nice, neat gaming table that looks fun to play across. So I do like to sort of try and break up the monotony of an open face gaming table, and give myself something a little bit more interesting to look at. What I'm actually going to do, instead of just using plastic card, I'm going to use a bit of sprue. I've got some nice lengthy straight pieces, so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim some of these to fit, as it also gives us a little bit of line blocking as well, line of sight blocking. And actually, these two little pouring spouts, the round nubbins, I'm going to use them as my guide, because they give me something to work with. Might as well keep that bit of trim there for the rubble. I'll trim this into two pieces, cut this off, and then there we go. Give myself the support frame that I was after. Again, just going to go a bit heavy duty on the super glue, get that on there. Let's get this attached. Gives this thing a little bit more strength. It's a bit more thematic in nature. I'll tell you what, I'll attach to the pipe work. There we go. Nice and easy. And what I'll probably do is I'll just do the same on the other side. Get myself another little piece of sprue. Got one there that's got those two similar looking nubbins. Might as well stick with the theme. But again, not concerning myself too much with the tidiness of it all, as it kind of goes against my concept of what goes on in the underhive. I do believe that the haphazard nature of the building in the underhive should just be used to your advantage when you are building terrain. It does you all sorts of favours, is very forgiving when it comes to this. So I know I'm spending a fair bit of time on what's basically a piece of junk, alright? And there's a reason for that. What I would like people to do when they're building their terrain is quite literally just take a bit of time doing the junky bits. Alright, they're important. They give your underhive a sense of I'm going to say belonging. It's not the word I'm looking for, but you know, it gives you something that brings your models to life. You can be the best painter in the world. You could paint all kinds of fabulous detail into anything that you choose to do, right? And that's great. However, if you've got added little extra details, little bits and pieces that you have to look to find, that's where you find the real satisfaction. Now, all I've done, there you go, added a couple of bits of crap to what is basically some drinking straws, some bits of old sprue that most people sort of tend to chuck away. I'm not even worried about the fact that I could see Games Workshop all over that sprue, because I'd have to be looking really closely underneath the model to see that. And you know what? Tell you what we'll do. just in case someone was to have a couple of copyright issues or something, I'm just going to trim a little strip of plastic card up. And I'm just going to fit that in there. Just because. Just because. Yeah, a little dog of super glue in there. So I suppose if you've got any copyright concerns, you could just fix it this way, couldn't you? Still too long. Here we go. No, that's actually still too long. I thought I had that. There we go. Like I said, I'm not measuring, I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm just attaching things. Here you go. Now I've basically got what looks like a piece of garbage H-frame, and all I will do is I will fit that underneath here, because this will then, I'll try and get a look at this for you. As I pop this on this base here. Let's lift it up a minute. Here we go. This will fit under there. I may have to trim it slightly, but that's fine. Something standardly can't fix. Or I may just sink that. Yeah, it's like 1 millimeter too tall. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to mark its position underneath, gouge out a little bit at the bottom, which will probably help me in terms of fixing it. And this is where not fixing everything together too quickly helps you as well. So as I say, what I'll do is I'll use my my bright coloured pen just to mark where I want this to sit. I'm going to put it at an angle facing my little curve here. I want base 1 there, base 2 there, and I'll just pop it in there, and I will get that fitted. And then what I'll do is I'll come back then with the next clip, and I will start doing some filling. And what I'm going to do in the next bit is I'm going to generally fill the underneath here before I fix the base and the building together, because it's easier to work on. There we go. So I've did a quick little speedy little video for you, just very quickly getting that attached. And what you can see here is I've actually built up in the middle some of this filler just to sort of create the support it needs. I've made sure it sort of remains nice and upright. And I'm just using the butter knife basically to sort of put a spread around. Now I've super glued this half a barrel down, which is one of the things I talked about, just because I want to put in your mind that I want to be able to use this space under here. So I can get a model here, I can get a model here, you know, by reaching in underneath I could put a model underneath once it's all textured. So I've got plenty of fight space underneath the building to use the actual miniature, so it remains practical. I think anything more than this on a base, even this size, where it might feel quite open, by the time you put a building on the top, it's not going to be that open. So you have to be very careful about minimizing the scenery that you use, but maximizing its effectiveness. You're going to min-max your appearance. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly put a bit of extra filler on down here. Now, just use the tip of the knife just to sort of spread this about and push it about a little bit. All I'm going to do to make sure the barrel looks buried, I've got to put a bit of filler at its base, and I'm just going to spread it in just to fill the base of the barrel very gently, just so that I put a cap on the bottom of the barrel. Nothing more complex than that. It's really super simple. And then I'm just going to literally tease in a bit of the filler around the base of the barrel, just to help it look a bit more buried. I'll take filler from elsewhere in the base to do this, because I don't want to overload it too much. And I'm just very gently going to sort of put it around the base. Don't forget, I'll be able to add more detritus with the tea leaves and the gravel bits later to help with this. But what's important with this section is I don't have any gaps showing. I will be hiding it more later, but if I've got any gaps there, there's always a risk that they'll be seen later. So I'm just very carefully just going to tease the filler in there, just like that, just to help the sort of buried barrel look. There we go. All right. Now then, before I go on and do another speedy video of me just kind of doing the bulk of the fillering on here, just to give you an idea what the next stages are, I'm going to fill all of this. But before I do so, I'm going to put all my sprue bits and things in there. I'll put like some bobs of PVA on, and I'll push the sprue in, and that will give me my sort of rubble, my broken bits here. I'm going to do around the edges, but I'm not actually going to put any filler for about 1/2 centimetre, 5mm around where I plan to stick these bases. So basically everything outside of the pink line. And that's because I want to glue it down. I'll use a bit of super glue for some quick fixing. So I'll probably put a couple of spots of super glue on, and then the rest will be a bit of PVA. So the super glue will hold it, the PVA will give it its final finish and holding. And once that's glued down, then I'll come back and I'll do some more filling around the bases to hide the base feet of the building so they become part of the base then. And I will also give it extra strength later on once it's on there. Okay, so very quickly while I'm here, what I'll do is I'm actually quite happy in the main with how my filler is sort of stacked up. Now you see what I mean about you need a reason to have mounds of debris. I've built up around the base of this. I'm not going to get a model in here at any point, so I can build it up a little bit, and this is going to give me my platform with which to put all my sort of rubbly bits. And the more I kind of poke and prod it with a knife, the more I'm sort of generating a texture I don't really want to play with later. Quite happy to paint on that based on the way it's looking. I've got a nice smooth section here, which is cool because it could be sort of wind swept or whatever. I've got one rough side, so imagine a sand dune almost. You can see here. Yeah. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pour in a bit of PVA. I know this filler hasn't set, but in fairness, this technique hasn't ever really sort of failed me in the past. I'm just going to roughly blob out where I want my bits of rubble to sit. So I'm going to put a bit of PVA around that leg, a bit of PVA around that leg there. I'm actually going to put a fair blob in front here. I'll come back and I'll do the back in a second. And all I'm going to do, just chuck on my bits of sprue. Like I said, I enjoy doing terrain. I like to do things the simple way. I don't really feel the need to have it overly complicated. I'm just going to poke them in a little bit so that it sits in the glue and the filler. Now once this is textured, you're actually not going to see a lot of these, but what this will do is it will give you things that have sort of smooth finishes to it, and then you'll end up with that sort of nice sort of rubbly feeling. Now then, I will probably add a bit more to this side, I think, just make sure this stays straight, and then I'll get on with filling the base. So on this bit now, obviously I've now textured the base. I'm going to be gluing the building on in just a second. But what I want to do is very quickly, while it's appropriate to do so, is I'm going to show you applying some of that tea leaf mix now. And some of that decorative sand. So essentially, I want to add a bit around the base of this and around the barrels. I'm not going to do anything around the feet because when I attach the building, I'm going to apply more filler. And I'm going to blend it all in and then add more rubble and stuff around the feet then. So what I'm trying to do is just get a bit of the rubble stuff into the middle before I go any further. This is so easy to put on. Literally just go and create a picture with your PVA glue. And this is the cheapy white stuff from B&M's. I do love the B&M stuff, it's great. And just let it sort of sit there. I'm going to do the same around the barrel, around the back end of it. Again, this is the area I was trying to sort of hide and blend in. Again, I just want you guys to see how easy this really is to do, okay? There we go. Bit of glue. Doesn't matter if it goes anywhere else. I'm going to put a little bit in front of my my rubble tower here, just because I want to sort of build this out a little bit. Again, this is meant to be some sort of an interesting feature, but nothing too sort of line of sight blocking. It's just there to break it all up a little. So here I have, around my barrel, around my little central struts that I've built there, I've got my my PVA glue. I'm just going to use my finger, by the way, to poke this material in. And what I'm going to do as well, I'm just going to chuck a bit of paper down here so that when I pour it out, I've got something to catch it on. I can pour it back in my tub. So get my tub, give it a little jiggle, give it a little pour. Simple. Just pour it in, just like this. I'll try and get this so you can see it a bit better. It's probably advisable to overload what you're trying to do. So just, feel free to sort of pour like crazy. All right, I'm gonna get around the barrel as well. I'll try and get up close here so you can see this a little better. Bear with me. So you see the edge of the barrel here. Let me just shift my focus. There you go. Squeeze, little shake, pour on the base. That's it. So pour it on, and the thing is, for those of you like me who like a cup of tea, this smells great because it's got that lovely rich tea smell to it. So there we are. I've applied that. All I'm going to do is I'm going to pat it with my finger a bit. Bear in mind that my filler is still wet, so a lot of this will stick to the filler, and that is fine. But when I shake this off, a lot of it's going to come out. So I'm just going to poke it in a little bit with my finger, just so that it really settles itself into the PVA. And I'm just going to give this a little tap off onto my paper. Very gently, try not to lose too much. I'm lucky to have a fairly big table, fairly smooth, so I can actually come back to this and I can dust off camera. There we go. And that is it. That is how I would mess that up. Now, as you see, I'll try and get in close so you can see it. The sprues here are highly visible. Now, they have a nice smooth finish when you paint them, which means you can make them look like bits of rubble and stuff. So what you're doing is you're breaking up the texture of the base. And you know, already just looking at this, I'm sort of really happy with how this sort of bit's turned out underneath. And I think if I'd have added any more underneath to the base, it probably would have been too much, I think. So I'm kind of glad not to have done that. I'm just rest this up here for a second. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to attach my building to its base now. Bit of super glue, bit of PVA glue, and away to go. And obviously, if you've got a piece of newspaper, perhaps that would be better for catching, because it's bigger and it's got a fold in it already. The sheet of A4 will do the trick, but you do have a bit of cleaning up to do afterwards. Like I say, I've still got loads and loads of this mix left in here. Tons of it. That's only 3 tea bags. That's nothing, you know, and a tiny sprinkling of the gravel from the decorative sand. So let's get on with attaching the building to the base now, and we'll get this on here. So as I say, we're going to use the white glue in the mains, so I'm going to put my lines in first. So I'm just going to give myself an outside edge, and what I'll do is I'm going to show you how I apply with a knife the filler, because it's something I think it's worth doing. You know, you've got these kitchen butter knives that I think are great. They're good for this. But it's got a serrated edge, which is handy because you can use that serrated edge to create a bit of texture. It also has the flat, smooth side when you want to be smoothing it off. So you can basically pick and choose how you want to finish each piece of terrain as you go. Let's get my little daub of super glue in the middle there for a bit of holding, just to keep this in place as we work. There we are, nice and simple. Like I said, this is the cheap super glue. No need to spend sort of £4 or £5 on a 10ml bottle of glue or 5ml bottle of glue when you can spend £1 and get 8 of these little 2 gram bottles. Especially for terrain, it's brilliant. You can kind of use it with impunity without sort of worrying about running out of super glue, especially when you're sort of dealing with assembling your stuff. You know, it's nice just to be able to sort of have a bit of freedom to get it done. So there we are. Let's just get this on there. Make sure my legs are all lined up where I wanted them to be. There we go, get that stuck down. And that is already holding, thanks to the super glue fitting underneath. So I've put a little bit of pressure on it. And then that. Actually, here's the other thing as well. With this MDF cut terrain, just something I'm noticing even now. If you look at the bottom of this particular bulkhead, you'll see a bit of PVA's actually come through the base of the bulkhead. Yeah. And that's really handy because obviously that means that the PVA that you're using to attach this to the base is now gone right the way through the base, and by the time that goes off, that's going to be rock solid. Now then, underneath there, my pipes are meeting the top. All I'm going to do is very carefully turn this upside down, and I'm going to just apply me a little bit of super glue in there just to get that held so that that doesn't go shifting about on me. So nice and easy. I've still got bits of debris falling off. And what I may actually do with this as well, for the sake of giving me a little bit of purchase and a bit of something to bite onto, I'm going to use my tea leaves to my fullest advantage as well. I'm going to just flood that bit with some debris, because it'll give it all something to bite onto. Not too worried about making a mess, because I'll just sweep it up off the table in a minute. Here we go. That will actually soak up the super glue and give me a really solid bite in there now. So like I said, cheap super glue. I'm just going to fill that with super glue now. There we go. That will bite. I'll do the same here on this one. See, I've got the super glue in the gap. I'm just going to flood that with super glue. There we go. That will now go rock solid. That ain't shifting for anybody. So I'll get this off here. Pause this very quickly and I'll come back to it once I've just cleaned up after myself, because I can't work in a messy environment. So give me 2 seconds. Okay, so that's me back. Sorry about that. So now what we have here is my building is attached. I've got a nice clean workspace to work with. Now this is my big white tile that is actually my palette. I usually keep this clean with acetone-free nail polish remover. So once I finish painting models and things, I'll give this a wipe up. The reason why I like to work with this big white tile, and just so you give you a quick little thing, I bought some of those felt foot pads from B&M's. Stuck them underneath. That way it's easy to move this thing around on my table without scratching the hell out of it. And it's very helpful because I've got the smooth surface on top of the tile, which means I can sort of spin things around it nice and easy when I want to work on it. Plus, if I have to move the tile, I'm not struggling, because I mean it's a heavy tile. You know, you kind of have to get your fingers under it. These pads, it just makes it easier to move. It just creates a nice, easy workspace to work with. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to come back to the building, use my knife, and all I'm going to do is a little bit of filler. Now this poly filler stuff is interesting. It's really lightweight. It feels like it's full of air bubbles, and it feels like you have to squish the air out of it to get it to spread. That's just something I've learned as I've started using this stuff compared to the other traditional heavier ready mix filler. It is nice to work with, I've got to be honest, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to push it down a bit like butter, I suppose. It's a butter knife. I'm just going to spread this on here, and I'm just literally going to just get this blended. I'm not going to worry too much about the neatness and the tidiness of it. What I want to do is cover the foot pad of the base. All right. Now, if I'm making a scenic base like this, it doesn't look right to have a building with feet. So I'm just going to continue packing that in throughout, just to kind of get this all sort of blended together. Just work on it for a little while. I mean, the filler's got loads of time to play with, so you're not going to run out of time on it. You know, it does go off fairly quickly compared to some other fillers, but in terms of its working time, it's great. You could just sort of leave the pot open there while you work on it. Just don't sort of expect to be spending hours without the top going crusty. But the aim here is to sort of do this thing in stages. We don't want to be doing hours on just filling. So I'm just going to very quickly get this all poked in, get these feet sort of all covered up and whatever, and blended into the base. So between the PVA and the super glue, we're going to have a real nice solid attachment here, and it's going to really help with the base's survivability during gameplay as well. That's the other thing, because if you put on here's the thing with these MDF laser cut terrain pieces. If you don't base them excuse me, if you don't base them, these bulkheads can snap off, and then you end up doing that whole sort of repair thing. However, if you base absolutely everything you've got and you use the same sort of material for the base, so I use this 5mm foam core, it's great because everything has the same height off the table. When you're playing, everything lines up nicely. Plus, as you get used to working with the material, it gets faster each time, especially when you're sort of trimming up those chamfered edges. So I recommend picking yourself a base. The foam core is good because you can work it with a Stanley blade or an X-Acto knife or a snap-off blade or whatever. Any of those sort of razor sharp implements will work foam core. Whereas if you're using something like 3mm MDF or ply, you need to have a whole range of other tools available to be able to work that into a base. Although you know, the extra time taken does mean that you'll end up with a stronger base, because foam core isn't the strongest material out there. Ply is probably the strongest, but also one of the most difficult to work, as you do need a saw to be able to get through that. MDF, that's good, but it is what it, I mean, if you think about what MDF is, it's medium density fiberboard. The fiber part being the operative phrase there, and what that does, it makes it very absorbent. So anything that you stick on MDF, you're going to have to be prepared to use a lot of. Foam core I like, it's got that sort of extruded polystyrene in the middle, which gives it its sort of strength, but it's got card lining on either side, which means that you can work on the card side, but do remember that this polystyrene does dissolve under spray paint and super glue, which is why I've covered it all with a filler on the edges, so that I can quite comfortably get in there with my spray paint later when I come to paint this thing up. So I'm quite happy with that leg there now. As you can see, this is quick. I mean, this isn't long. I'm doing this while talking to you. I'm trying to sort of keep this thing on camera so you can see it, because I'm resisting all my urges to pick this thing up and move it around and maneuver it and get into it. But you know, it's not hard. I mean, I'm just going to get in here. I am going to come back to this with my tea leaf and my sand mix. So again, it doesn't have to be perfectly covered. It just has to be covered enough so that I can get my mix on there, and then I will let the actual debris do the work for me in terms of blending it in. What I want to cover this for is to get that sort of extra layer, because as this hardens over the top, you're going to get this shell that sits over the feet, and that's just going to really make sure that this thing doesn't come off the base accidentally ever. You may well find that you'll snap it off if you throw it in a temper because you lost a fight. Don't recommend doing that. Just look after your stuff. There we go. Yeah, I think one more little bit there. Yeah, right, okay. So my feet are now covered. My building is now sort of officially part of my base. You could probably spend all day doing minor fixes on this. Just remember that in the underhive, which is where I'm theming this, things are dirty, they're nasty, they're grubby, they're grimy, they're not very nice. So you can get away with having minging ground, basically, on your terrain. You can get away with it looking like garbage, because the entire environment is just a load of rubbish. So I'm going to do the same old thing as before. I'm going to get my a little daub of PVA. I'm not going to go too crazy on this, because I don't need to. But what I am going to do as well, I'll come back to it later on, I'm going to have a think about anything I might want to add to the tops of the platforms on this, because I do think they're plain. I do think you need something extra. If you don't add something, I think you're just kind of going to lose out, to be honest, but you don't want to add so much that you can't play on it. So I've got to be mindful of that. On one of my buildings, I added some strips of L-shaped plastic card, and I made a crane, which I'll show you later on perhaps. And the idea behind the crane was I wanted a little theme for each of my buildings. I didn't want them to be just sort of extra plain and sort of exist with no purpose, which, you know, makes for great gaming terrain, but it doesn't make for great theming. And I just imagined in my head that it was a loading crane. I imagined a Necromunda type vehicle rolling underneath it, loading up off of this crane and then driving off to go wherever it had to go. And that just literally gave me just enough of an idea to be able to build this little sort of crane. I justified it in my head. And then the end result is something which can be used as a standalone terrain piece, but it also works well in terms of breaking up. Although these models are lovely and detailed, they're monotonous. They are monotonous, you know, they all kind of look the same. They've got the same sort of engraved platforms in. I like a bit of, flavour, a bit of concept to the buildings, so to speak. So for me, it's important that I've got something going on in the background that I can look at. It's just, those are the little details that make terrain really nice to play over. For me, I'd rather have, I like having nice painted miniatures. I like having nicely done scenery, because I think that if nothing else, miniature war games are a visual game. You know, they're as much visual as they are strategic, you know, so I think you've got to take the time to actually sort of enjoy what you're doing, and make sure that things look the way you want them to look. Right, so there we go. I have now officially based this piece here. I think that for the sake of keeping it quick and easy, oops, I'll move the camera now, keep going. For the sake of keeping things quick and easy, I don't really want to add too much to this terrain piece. I've already kind of got a thematic thing going on with my choice of bulkheads. There's obviously some sort of cooling room, you know, I don't know. So perhaps something could just be attached. I mean, what I may do is this little lid, which I didn't actually use, I'm just going to super glue it to the side of one of the balconies there. I think that's probably going to work for me. It just gives me a little bit of something extra to the terrain piece. Let's see if I haven't run out of super glue. Oh, I haven't. I'm doing good. There we go. Just attach that. There we go. And because the MDF is very absorbent, like I said, that will take the super glue. And when I paint this, it's just gonna, you know, it's just gonna give that little bit of extra something that just doesn't leave it as a plain old building, you know. And I think that is probably what's really important when you're building this sort of terrain. In fact, what I may just do here as well, I'm going to attach myself a little bit of sprue. It's thin, it's a bit of detail. I'm going to trim up these excess bits off the side. I'm not going to worry too much about being very particular about it. One of the things that's interesting about these buildings as well is we've got our gangs, and I don't know if you noticed in the start of the video there was a Goliath bit of tagging going on with the scenery that I showed you in the video earlier on. The concept that we're having here is, as we're building this terrain, we're going to have some gang fights, and the gangs are going to basically be fighting for turf. And at the end of the campaign, we're going to have a winner picks first kind of scenario where effectively the gangs get to choose the terrain pieces, and we're going to paint them up in themed colours to do with the gangs. So the Goliath terrain, I mean, I claimed the chem towers myself because why not? They're mine. I'm running out of glue on this one. I claimed the chem tower, so they've got a Goliath tag. There's an Escher gang involved, so what we'll do is they may be a yellow colour, and they will be painted to represent the Escher gang in yellow, perhaps. Right, so that super glue bottle is now empty. I'm just going to attach this here. Oh, undo you go. Let's get this vertical. Oh, I glued myself. Yeah. Now then, while I just crack open another bottle of super glue from the packet, this thing is just a simple little detail that I've added here. It doesn't mean anything. All it's doing is just breaking up the surface of the model in question, just to give us something a bit more interesting to look at. If you remember earlier on, I said as well, you kind of need to have a reason for dust and dirt and debris to gather up. So it's let's pop a bit of glue in there just to make sure that stays. Now that I've got this sort of stick here, I've got a reason now to add a bit of debris to the middle of the base. Because what I'll be doing is around the edges, just inside places like here and here, I'll be putting a run of PVA glue on the inside corner here, probably the opposite corners up the top. I'll be adding the PVA mix, and I'll be putting in some of my tea leaves and gravel mix in there just to sort of create a bit of detritus build-up. Not enough to get in the way of gameplay, but enough to sort of decorate the room. And I'll probably put a couple of bits inside as well. And that is effectively, in my mind, that's enough there on this model just to break it up and make it a little bit more interesting for play. You know, because what I want to do is I've got some freestanding pieces from Zone Mortalis, which I could put on these platforms to make them look a bit more interesting and break that up a little bit as well. So yeah, just something here just to give your terrain a little bit extra here. So what I'll do is I'm going to clip the video here. I'll add the terrain mixes and then I'm going to go off and I'm going to let this thing cure, and then when I come back this will be spray painted black, ready for some attention, and that'll be a quick video just to show it in black, and then I'll probably be using a yellow as my theme color, either yellow or blue for the Isha, maybe blue, and I'll be dusting the model then with spray paint, which I'll do that on camera just to give you the sort of the hint of color that we're going for. So this will become an Isha piece of terrain under their turf. So there you go, lovely jubbly. Okay, so we're going to give this like a black undercoat all over. It goes off fairly quick, so get the wind behind me because it's fairly windy today. I'll just get this thing blacked out ready. I'm quite lucky. Between the wind and the warmth of the sun today, it's trying to paint off really quickly. I do like to try and get the shaders on. The black is still a little bit wet, because it just sort of dulls down the overall pigment. That gets it nice and black, ready for starting. It's a good cheat to use black because it shades everything nicely for you. The worst case scenario, what is some game worthy terrain, you just black it and dust it. So I use a little bit of red just for the base because that's the colour theme of my table. So it's a very, very quick dusting of red. Doesn't matter if it rises up onto the base of the building. It is a dusty environment in the underhive after all. But I am purposefully aiming sort of downwards to try and keep it off the building. and that gives me my base. So I'll try and show you now while we're here. It gives us the base for the table. Lovely jubbly. Now, it's a light blue that I've got. That's going to be the Escher gang colours. So we're going to tag this up as an Escher building. It's quite a subtle thing that we're going to be doing. Those are generally going to be in the colour. So the chem tags are red for the Goliaths, which will be red. Which are generally blue themed. So we're going to have a blue theme to the buildings for anything that falls under Escher too. And again, it's just a light dusting that we give the building. And I'm going lighter towards the top as well. I don't mind if it reds down, because it makes it fit better. And that'll give us something to start working on for detail. Okay guys, so we're just going to have a little look at adding a bit of colour to this model now, just to liven it up a little bit. I'll be using the Citadel dry brush. It's got a nice big head on there, good soft bristles, which is great. And I'll also be using the Citadel base brush because I quite like the angled cut on it. It's good for doing work on the terrain, especially when you've got some of the flat pieces on here to have a look at. So the colours I'm using, it's only a small range of colours really. We've got Agrax Earthshade, which is a brown coloured ink. We've got a Reichland Flesh Shade, which is a redder, a more reddy brown ink. Steel Legion Drab, which is a nice brown. Bugman's Glow, which is a variation on a brown into flesh shade. Rakarth Flesh, which is more of a bone colour for sort of highlighting. We've got Lead Belcher and Stormhost Silver for metalwork and highlights, and then we've got the black, white and yellow so that we can do some simple flashing, you know, the old hazard stripes a la Necromunda. So what we'll do very quickly, we're going to have a quick look underneath the model. You can see here that the piping worked really well. I'm just moving my hands so we can get a bit of better light on this for you. So you can see that that's a nice little bit of a blocker under there. You can see that the rubble underneath ended up looking really nice. We'll take a look on that side as well, because obviously we've got our semi-submerged barrel, which is actually a really nice colour, even with the red dusting on it. And if we take a good look on the inside, excuse me, I'll see if I can do a zoom on this for you. Try and get a bit in. It's not ideal. Let's have a look. Yeah, you can see how the sprues work really well in terms of just breaking up the shape when it comes to doing the base work inside of a model. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to decide really how and where we want to be doing things. We'll start with the simple things first. So underneath there, I know it's out of sight, but it is in our mind. So what we're going to do is very quickly we're going to put a bit of Lead Belcher on the metal work for it. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm not going to be thinning down the paints on this one. We're just going to go and use them neat from the pot. And that's just purely because it's just a bit quicker, and when you're going on scenery, it's not the same level of detail that we have when we're working on miniatures. So we get the we really don't need to be quite so thin on the paint just to preserve the detail. And also I'm trying to show you how to do this in a fairly quick way. Since the last clip, I've allowed this time to set so that some of the paint can dry off properly and everything. And what I'll do very quickly, I'll probably switch over into a fast version of this video, just to give you an idea. But the plan is to touch up all the silver work, and then we'll come back, we'll take a look at where we want to put the hazard stripes, and we'll probably put a bit of a highlight on some of the rubble. We'll probably grey that out a little bit to match with some of the scenery in the building, and we'll take it from there. So we're going to get started, and we're going to have a nice little zoomy video to show you what's what. So there you have it, guys, after a quick hyperlapse video, just to sort of get through all of it quickly for you. This is a basically finished model. I haven't done a great deal of work to it to make it sort of what I would consider to be games worthy. I mean, all in all, it's really simple. I've added a couple of rough chevrons, the black and yellow hazard stripes, and they are rough, believe me. I didn't really take much time over them. One single flat colour on the blue pipe there, just to sort of give me a richer blue and the overall blue theme, which I'll come back once that's fully dried off, and we'll give that a little bit of a dusting with some Calgar blue to lighten it up a little bit and give it a bit of depth. But essentially all that I've done really is I've dry brushed some Steel Legion Drab on the red to lighten up some of the base items. I'll try and get that there for you to see, so you can see a bit of the dry brushing there. We've re-undercoated and dry brushed the debris inside, as you can see, and obviously on the roof it's a bit difficult, but you get the idea. You know, we've just added some of this debris here just to break up some of the monotony of the flatness of the surface. When we get underneath, then we can see that our silver little buttress underneath looks pretty tidy. Not bad considering you watch me just kind of make that up as I went along at the beginning of the video. On the other side, I've just added a little bit of detail there. I can also put a warning stripe on the pipe just for no reason other than because. But again, for something that was just a couple of bits of sprue and some drinking straw, it breaks up the underneath of the building quite nicely, and it's still great for gameplay, so it's not really going to get in the way, but it just adds a little feature to it. So yeah, adding a couple of bits of junk, really going heavy to town on the ink washes as well at certain parts. So I ink washed the bottom sections of each of these layered on plates to give it a bit more depth and shade. It totally makes them pop out, which makes a massive difference compared to when they were just sort of flat painted with the spray paint dust. So I would definitely say if you wanted to have a game worthy piece of scenery, get some good inks, use some spray paints. At the very least, if you paint it and dust it the colour you wanted, like I did earlier on in the day, and just ink it, you're going to have something that's quite tidy. Altogether, this didn't take me very long to do at all, and the video is probably about as long as it's taken me to do it in reality, if I take out the drying times and such. But minimal amount of effort. I've only silvered up the portholes and washed them, silvered up the door using some lead belcher there and put an ink wash on that. I'll try and get that a bit closer for you to see, just to break it up a little bit And that is about it. That makes for really simple terrain. Oh, this is an interesting one as well. I wanted to talk about this with a fan. Painted the fan silver, obviously because it's not meant to be blue, like the rest of the building is. But what I've done is I've gone, again, quite heavy with the ink, and I've overloaded the rivets, and I've encouraged a bit of drip to occur with the ink, and I've just let that sort of settle as is. That alone makes a big difference to that porthole, which, you know, would be quite easily lost to the flatness of the laser cut MDF. I mean, these barriers and things, I mean, I'm not that thrilled with them. The detail isn't that well engraved, so putting ink on it doesn't really work. I'm probably just going to leave them. I may come back and pick out some detail with a finer brush, but that's a job for a different day, I think. Same as with the flooring. So at the moment, for me, as far as I'm concerned, that's gameable. This will have a bit of a spray varnish on it. All I've done for the barrel under there is I've literally just ink washed it. Try and get a bit of light on this for you to see, just to sort of pop the barrel out a little bit. And that's it. You know, nice simple piece of gaming terrain. You know, if you've got your laser cut MDF, this stuff here's from war games, tournaments. The stuff is pretty nice. The pricing on it's reasonable. So I mean, I think if you've got a smaller budget, I think war games terrain is probably war games tournaments, sorry, better. But if you've got, and I'm not saying they're more expensive, they're probably a shade more at TT Combat. I haven't compared the prices recently, but I would say that the TT Combat items are better in quality overall, and easy to assemble. So yeah, that's it. That is how to do a nice, easy Necromunda gaming ready piece of terrain. Thank you.